Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this new installment of the EPC's Unpacking Turkish Foreign Policy event series. Today we are going to be unpacking Turkish-Greek relations. My name is Amanda Paul, and I'm Deputy Head of the Europe in the World programme at the EPC. Today I'm joined by two very well-known experts on this issue and many other issues related to Turkish foreign policy. They are also very old sparring partners, I think it's fair to say. So I believe that we are in for a real treat. We have with us Mustafa Aydin, Professor of International Relations at Kadir University, as well as being President of the International Relations Council in Turkey, among many other things. We are also joined by Dimitrios Triantaphyllou, who is Professor of International Relations and Politics at the Panteion University of Social and Political Studies in Athens. So a big welcome to both of you. Since I first began working on Turkey, I have to say that I have seen many ups and downs in this relationship. I've witnessed the good, the bad, and the ugly, sometimes the very ugly, in terms of bilateral ties. But since 2023, since the tragic earthquake in Turkey, we have seen a very important rapprochement going on after a long period of confrontation and hot-headed shenanigans. Now, at the recent Antalya Diplomacy Forum, President Erdogan said that he was committed to fostering peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean and Aegean, highlighting effort to sustain a positive atmosphere with Greece. However, also known as being somebody who can throw the odd curved ball or two, I think that President Erdogan's comments during his recent visit to Cyprus over the weekend have raised some eyebrows. So we are here to discuss all the ins and outs of Turkey-Greek relations, and I'm going to start by asking both of our speakers a very general question to kick us off. I'm going to ask them to assess how they view relations today, what have been the main success stories over the last couple of years, where is there room for progress, or where are we still seeing significant challenges. As usual, to you, the audience, I would ask you to put your questions either by clicking on the hand icon or by writing in the Q&A box. Please start to do this already, because then we can put your questions from the beginning of the discussion. But I'm going to ask you, Mustafa, to kick us off with your sort of starting insights on where you see things standing at the moment.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, first of all, we have to accept that the two countries have just come out of one of the most difficult periods of their relationship. This goes quite a long way in Greek-Turkish relations. We had seen several periods where tensions rose high, and there was always a possibility of direct military conflict. But this last one was quite prolonged period, although I didn't think that we were close to military blow-up, but the possibility of accidents was always there, and it went quite a long period. Now we have different procedures that have been employed. One is called positive agenda between the two countries, led by foreign ministers. It aims to improve the general atmospherics in the relationship and lay the ground for negotiations and serious talks. Then there is this political dialogue between the ministries, high-level bureaucrats. It's continuing. There is this exploratory talks. I don't know how many of them. In the last count, it was like 65, I think. It has been going on for years, but during the period of intense tension, they were suspended. Now they restarted. We also have a separate confidence building measures mechanism between the militaries and civilians also. And business dialogue have also started between business associations. So these are all, I think, the good news that you are looking for. Whether they are achievements, it's debatable. I mean, in the Greek-Turkish relations, as we have seen this before in the rapprochement between what Özal and Papandreou, the father Papandreou, started, and it took like 10 years of rapprochement. Then we were again plunged into the period of conflict. So we are the kind of veterans of this history. We are usually very cautious when we are listing the good news. The good news, again, is that they keep on talking. And also for me is that we are not getting too much information from the talks, which is a good news. I mean, it would not normally be good news in a normal countries, maybe. But between Greece and Turkey, one of the issues and problems has always been the media presence and naysayers in the society. They can use everything in negotiations or in talks. So the fact that nothing is being debated and talked in public, which is a good news. The bad news is that we are not yet, I think, on a position to start serious negotiations of give and take, right? I mean, eventually, everybody who works on these issues know and understand that there has to be a moment where two countries have to compromise on their maximalist positions. Obviously, we are not there yet, and everybody is kind of presenting their own positions and repeating them maybe, but trying to develop the trust between the interlocutors. That was something that missing, and we lost it in recent years. And the two governments are now trying to build up that trust. That's also a good thing. The negative aspect is there is always a possibility in Greek-Turkish relations something might happen by accident without intention. It might escalate and it might go out of control. That's a danger. And the final danger, I'll stop here, is militarization. The both countries are, it's not only because of what their interests are individually, but also because of the environmental issues, war between Russia and Ukraine in the north, another war in the south with Israel and Gaza, and now in Syria. So the environment has become more dangerous and difficult to manage. So both countries are actually militarizing, in a sense, buying more weapons and etc. So that's another danger, at least on the background. So let me stop here and then hear Dimitrios, what he's saying.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think this was a great opening overview, and I thoroughly agree with you that the geopolitical context, I mean, the new evolving geopolitical context is certainly having an impact on that relationship, as it is on many other relationships in regions around the world. But I'd like to hear from Dimitrios whether he shares your assessment or whether you see something different, Dimitrios, and maybe you can just flag up, because perhaps some of the audience, maybe they're all top experts, but maybe there's a few people who aren't, let's say hardcore followers of Turkiye-Greek relations, to sort of flag up what the main sort of irritants were, and to what degree they have, if they have at all, been tackled.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk in this forum here. Listen, I agree with almost everything that Mustafa Aydin has talked about. But the issues is, it happens that both of us right now are in Athens in a meeting. And I was just thinking that one of our interlocutors in our meeting this morning, who referred to Greek-Turkish relations, said something very interesting, that, this is a conflict that, because it has not been managed over decades, or what you've done is actually manage but not resolve the issues, you've had an accumulation of new issues added. to the differences between the two countries. So while it's been, and this has been the Greek position over time, that there's only one issue has to do with delimitation, you've had now, at least from the Greek perspective, but I think anyone studying Greek-Turkish relations can see that if one reads what the positions are of both sides, especially on the Turkish side, you've had over time new issues added. Minorities in Thrace, Cyprus has always been there, but it's become a part of it. The Eastern Med has come up, energy issues, and a number of other, and whether Ireland should be militarized or not militarized, under what treaties, and so on. These are issues that were never really there before. They've been added on, and so the argument is, as long as we do not get to a resolution or agree on how to resolve, these might accumulate, and there might be a breaking point, and part of it had to do with what Mustafa mentioned at the beginning, which was, in 2020, you had, I agree with them. I don't think we were ready to go to war, but there was a major confrontation in this Mediterranean where the navies of both sides faced each other. And there was even two ships that touched each other. And boys with guns and ships is a dangerous thing, and something can always lead, an accident could always lead to wider, could have wider implications. But there's been throughout a willingness, and this is interesting, I think, to avoid, I think, from both sides, a willingness to avoid going to the point of no return, irrespective of governments, both in Turkey and Greece. Part of it was linked at the beginning, and that's part of the issue was linked to Turkey's EU perspective, and we saw this in the 2000s for a while. That this was linked to that, and the exploratory talks that Mustafa mentioned, most of them were held then in the early 2000s, before Turkey got the green light to start accession negotiations. That prospect has gone for many reasons. Yes, Turkey is a candidate, but we know the process is frozen, and maybe it's becoming less relevant in today's world. We do not know. And so there is an issue of trying to maintain tensions at a low level, even though we did get to what we did in the fall of 2020, and even earlier in 2020 in the land border, with this influx of refugees that came from Turkey, to try to find a modus vivendi. And what we know, because it's interesting, what both sides have tried to do, because this is, I think, from both a Greek perspective and a Turkish perspective, it's a national issue. It's one of these fundamental issues. Public opinion is very relevant in that sense. And what both sides have tried to do is to try to cultivate, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, their own public opinions. But the one thing that's interesting is, at the people-to-people level, usually there's a favorable opinion of the other. And I think that has helped. It can be manipulated. At times you can tell, oh, the Greeks are doing this or the Turks are doing this, and therefore, our positions are untenable. But on the other hand, the cultivation of public opinion has also helped both sides to get to what you mentioned at the beginning, which was the consequences of the March 2023 earthquakes. And this, because of the reaction of Greek public opinion, it wasn't the only country that reacted, but I understand the relevance of Greece reacting, reminiscent of what happened in 1989, with first aid workers and so on, and a real human interest. After all, an earthquake, even the one recently in Istanbul, affected parts of Greece as well. It was felt. I mean, the proximity in that sense, and we're both living in seismic regions, has helped to bring the two governments to this new chapter, which, even though it might not have been producing results, I think most significantly, and here is why I agree with Mustafa, since the run-up to the Vilnius summit, NATO summit in 2023, when we had now relatively new ministers or governments in both countries, and Hakan Fidan as foreign minister and Yorgos Gerapetritis as foreign minister, we've had these two these two gentlemen meet quite often, at times surprising us that they meet in places even like London, where they meetings that were not announced. They have been very tight-lipped, which I think is a novelty, and I think it's interesting, which keeps a lot of those that are concerned guessing about what's being discussed. They're the ones that managed to set up the meeting, the high-level political meeting held in Athens in December 2023, leading to the Athens Declaration, a political declaration, but this in itself is relevant. And since then, they have been able, and they just met again recently in Istanbul a couple of days ago in a private dinner, and they're planning to meet in Antalya at the foreign ministers ministerial, the informal one, and might even meet before that, from what I was just reading in the Greek press. And they are sort of, this dialogue, this three-basket dialogue that Mustafa described, which is, the political dialogue, where there had not been many advances. This is to deal with the substantive issues, but there's a willingness to discuss them. And I think that's relevant. And not only that, what we have as a discourse, a public discourse, I can see this very much because, the Greek government, I mean, Mitsotakis, the Greek prime minister, has been in power for 6 years. Yes, it's his second term, but 6 years. And we know that it's the same Turkish government and the same Turkish president. The discourse has been about trying to find a solution and maybe even going to The Hague or some other international body to resolve these issues if politically it cannot be resolved. The positive agenda, which is very relevant because the positive agenda is tied into increasing the trade relationship, which even at the height of this crisis in 2020, if one looked at the numbers, if one talked, I mean, I remember talking to commercial attaches of Greece, the consulate general in Istanbul. They were telling me that trade was booming, that the original goal was to get to a 5 billion threshold in bilateral trade, and that had been surpassed by then. And that's why in Athens, the objective now is 10 billion. It was about 6.6 at the time. So trade was still going on. So there's been lots of work being done in rebuilding that economic relationship. And I think up to now, this is what the two sides have to show. And they worked at it. It's not just having companies on both sides showing an interest in the other's countries and doing business. It's also rebuilding the whole structure with the business councils and so on, bringing in new people to make sure that there is a framework to help this process along. And there's also the CBM's issue, which is the discussions at MOD level, Ministry of Defense levels, where interestingly enough, it's not the military leading the delegations, it's diplomats on both sides leading the delegation. That's why Mustafa very correctly mentioned that it's political and military. And this is basically where our common membership since 1952 in NATO has helped. It's under the aegis of NATO. Then these are CBMs and so on. So, and what I want to say is, these are mechanisms, yes, in a transactional world, but it's a world that preceded the Trump tsunami world we're living in right now. And so even if it was a transactional world, the two countries still found mechanisms, yes, at the urging of the Germans and others, and even the previous US administration, to try to find a way to work together. And NATO, as I said, has helped. And I think one right now is working from there. How do you continue building on this? For example, I mentioned NATO because I'm just thinking, as we are slowly going, 55 days left to the NATO summit, and where I think many decisions will be taken about the future, our security futures, and the future of the West, whether the relevance of membership in NATO will continue to be helpful in enhancing the military dialogue or not. Given and what unites the two countries, I think, just like every other country in the world and in Europe in that sense, is that everyone is sitting on hot coals, waiting to see what Washington will decide and as to how we can move forward. So I think it's very, the fact that we have a process ongoing, that we have the two foreign ministers constantly discussing, not leaking anything unless they want something leaked, but it's always been positive. And I think it's frustrating for other observers to say, well, they're not talking, maybe they're discussing our future behind our backs, but I think it's a methodology that's working. Is because both countries are waiting to see how Washington will view the region, will view the relationship with both countries, and also all the other issues involved. And I think this helps right now the current process of dialogue, and explains in part why both Athens and Ankara seem committed to continuing it at this stage.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios. This was also, I think, a great overview. I think it's very positive that what we've been seeing for the last few years in terms of confidence building measures, all these talks at different levels, is playing into a trend of having a more, dynamic and consistent, or even trustworthy relationship between the two countries. But I just want to come back to you, Mustafa, on the point of the issue of the maritime boundary disputes, because I understand that these are very difficult, or it's very difficult to resolve. And one would hope that all of these different level conversations are moving us towards that point. But what do you see as the sort of potential development or timeline to actually make a concrete change in resolving this, if at all? And just to bring it back to what Dimitrios was just saying about the Trump administration, do you view Washington now as able to play a positive role in terms of supporting or progressing Greek-Turkey relations? I mean, I've seen that President Trump has been very positive about President Erdogan. He's made some very flattering statements that have obviously been very useful for President Erdogan and his geopolitical goals. So I'd be interested to hear how you see that as playing into the objectives of improving Greece-Turkey relations and resolving these ongoing disputes. I'm sorry if that was a very long question.
I'm not sure that I have that long answer, but let me try. First of all, I wouldn't put a timeline on solving any of the issues, and maritime boundary disputes. I mean, maybe even the name maritime boundary disputes is kind of makes it acceptable, because let's accept that this is a sovereignty issue, right? This is the highest possible reason for conflict between the two countries. We had several issues, problems. You mentioned some, Dimitrios mentioned some of them, but I think this is boundary issue that's the most dangerous and most volatile. And in the past, when the two countries came very close to fighting each other, it was always about this maritime issues and the boundaries. This is very delicate, and it's when you look at it, it boils down to the territorial waters. You have to decide the territorial waters, then you build up all other maritime boundary disputes. Here is various solutions. Possible solutions have been negotiated over the years, officially and unofficially. There has been several academic presentations and offers of solutions, and we know also that a couple of times, at least, the two countries have found a way to negotiate a solution on this issue. However, the political conditionalities were not amenable to sign the deal, so they didn't. Eventually, any kind of a negotiation that is going on today will kind of stumble down into the same sort of a solution. They will meet somewhere in the middle, not in the very extreme of the both countries' argumentation, and eventually, for one issue or another issue, they will have to go to the international court. That much we all know, because the international court, in a sense, becomes a useful tool to manage the publics in both countries. I said time and again that the concept of compromise, both in Greece and Turkey, is something unacceptable. It's a dirty word. You cannot compromise on your national interest, and you cannot compromise on your national waters if you are talking about the maritime disputes. So the two countries, if they agree on the overall general details of the negotiations, then they can take the issue to the international court and instruct the court accordingly. Then they can blame the court also for the concessions that they have to do to reach the conclusion. So I think that will happen in some time, but not now, because this is the, as I said, most difficult to solve, and most probably it will be left to the last. Because if you solve this, then most of other issues and the problems disappear. But before building the trust and gaining the support of the public opinions in both countries, it's difficult to go to the court or come up with a solution, or at least present solution to the public. So I think this will be the end. The best we can hope for the short term is the management and containment of the problem, avoiding high risk situation in the Aegean Sea, and now sometimes in the Mediterranean. In the past, the both countries agreed that to keep the problems into the Aegean, they kind of cordoned off the Eastern Mediterranean and didn't really conflicted there. But now the Eastern Mediterranean also became part of this maritime boundary disputes. And in a sense, the theater of operation has been extended. So it becomes even more complicated. So what I'm hoping is to kind of existing moratorium to keep it and extend it to cover the Eastern Mediterranean. One good development here is that the intentions of both sides seems to be understood from each side, and it looks as if they started to trust each other. I'll give you an example. I mean, just last week, I think 10 days ago, Greece had to submit its some variation of maritime boundary map to European Union. It was part of the European Union environmental requirement, and Greece actually delayed it, and then finally they had to submit it. Normally, this would have caused huge backlash in Turkey and very clear reaction and etc. But this time it didn't, because the Greek side, before announcing, they contacted the Turkish side, explained the situation, said that they have no intention of actually changing anything in the Aegean maritime boundaries, but they have to do this. So the reaction from Turkey was very mild, and a kind of unofficial map from a research center was distributed to the press, to showing that Turkey also have a similar map for the region. So, and then that's it. So there was no ships, navies being sent off or anything. No aircraft, airflows and everything. So this is a good sign that two sides actually already began to talk each other on this kind of issues. And this is most important for me, to building the trust so that they can do things and slowly. Regarding Trump and the United States, well, I mean, Trump is, when he flatters you, you have to be very careful. That's my understanding of Trump policy. Because in that meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel in the White House, he actually flattered both Netanyahu and Erdogan, President Erdogan, but also threatened both of them without actually saying very openly. He, in one sentence, he says that he loves Erdogan and Erdogan loves him. They respect each other. Erdogan is a great leader and everything. Then he says that they work very well. Then says that I got this minister out of Turkey. Now we don't remember in Turkey that episode was something popular or positive. He actually, if you follow Turkish-American relations or Turkey, you would remember, of course, that he threatened Turkish economy, to destroy Turkish economy, and he actually affected the Turkish economy at the time in order to get his this minister. So how he remembers things and, and how they exactly happened is two different things. So his impact, of course, the Turkish government, current Turkish government, is very careful about the United States and under Trump. We are watching, obviously, very closely how he deals with different countries, and then there will be a time that he might be also having opinions about Greek-Turkish relations or Eastern Mediterranean. So it seems that the intention is to delay it as much as possible so that the two countries, Greece and Turkey, can move along to certain positions. Then we won't need the Trump kind of managing the relationship. Because when he is involved, you never know where are you going to go. Domestically, of course, using Trump's rhetoric and presenting to Turkish public that he's a great friend of President Erdogan and vice versa is, of course, good publicity for the government. But that's it. I mean, in reality, of course, people are, that includes the government in Turkey and the president, are very careful about the intentions and what he might develop. And Turkey has several other issues that it needs to deal with the United States. Chief among them is the Syria and also this latest, let's say, crisis situation between Turkey and Israel, and what's going to happen in Ukraine and etc. So Greek-Turkish relations, in that sense, is under long list at the end of the long list, and I think the Turkish side would like to keep it that way.
Thank you, Mustafa. And I agree that President Trump does seem to have an opinion on everything, and it's not entirely clear how he would see the future of this relationship. So I'd like to ask you, Dimitrios, as well, how you view the involvement of the United States now in this region. I mean, Greece obviously has a very important relationship with the US. They have a very strategic base in Greece, but how do you see Trump could impact on this relationship? And just coming back to what we were talking about, maritime issues. I'm aware that I'm sort of shaking things up a bit here. I mean, Turkey does have this blue homeland doctrine, and they would still carried out this big exercise in the beginning of 2025. I mean, how did this? I mean, this doesn't necessarily play into the process of confidence building measures in the region, or that's how it looks to me. I mean, is the blue homeland approach still something that Greece is concerned about?
Yeah, lots of questions here. First of all, about Trump saying good things about foreign leaders. He's done it with everybody. He's even referred to Mitsotakis. I think Mitsotakis had made a statement when the whole tariff issue started, saying that it has to be a win-win solution between the EU and the US. And some journalists had asked Trump, I think it was at the White House, and Trump's response is, "Oh, I know him. He's a good chap." Sort of the same thing he said yesterday when someone asked him about the elections in Australia, and that, Albanese is, I know him, he's a good chap. So he says good things about everybody without really saying anything. But I think the US is not about US involvement. It's about what the US will decide based on how the current administration views US interests, are its priorities in the wider region, and this will affect the state of Greek-Turkish relations. But what does not seem to be affected when it comes to Greek-US relations is what you were referring to at the end. The defense agreement. I mean, there's a defense agreement, which I think it's a 5-year agreement that's going to be renewed, and there's negotiations will start about renewing them. And it's not just about, the base in Suda. It's also about a number of other bases that the US has as part of this agreement in Greece. And that doesn't seem to have been affected. I think there is dialogue between the Ministry of Defense in Greece, and I think 2 days ago it was announced that the Greek Minister of Defense talked to his US counterpart at the initiative of his US counterpart to start talking about this. So in that sense, there seems to be the institutional links which each country has with the institutions over time, the long-standing relationship, On the other hand, yes, the phobia about where Trump is taking this. We still do not have an ambassador. I mean, she's been appointed. She has not. No, she has been appointed. You know, the former what is it? The daughter-in-law of Donald Trump. Um, I, I, I don't think she's passed through Congress for hearings. She might be appearing in Greece at the summer. I think even in the Turkish case, right? If I understand, there's no ambassador still. We know who it's been, who has been nominated. But so I think all of these things are going to affect policy. Plus, the restructuring in the US right now, trying to understand who is actually running foreign policy and who is not running foreign policy, and whether, you know, the dual role of Rubio as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor is tenable, and whether he can actually do something with it. But I think all of this is contingent, again, on what happens on the two war fronts, on the Russia-Ukraine front, contingent on what happens on the in terms of Israel and Gaza, contingent on the talks between the United States and Iran, and what these actually could mean for the wider region. And I think, and this is why we are all, as I said, sitting on hot coals, waiting to see. Obviously, there are many more issues when it comes to U.S. Relations with Turkey than there are, you know, given Turkey's size, relevance, geography, and so on, than in the case of Greece, U.S. relations. But at some stage there will be U.S. involvement. But what I keep saying is that irrespective of this, we are actually right now trying to build a relationship, a bilateral relationship, on a sound basis that might be able to withstand whatever shocks might come from whatever future U.S. positions that might not be permanent, that might change again the next day. And this is the problem right now we are facing. On the other hand, one of the things that I mean, I was listening very carefully to what Mustafa was saying, and I was thinking of conversations we've had in the past, and it's something we have not necessarily worked on, is one of the things we have not been able to do as countries, our societies, even as analysts, is to, even though we know that things are moving towards ultimately going to some sort of arbitration and creating the framework, we have not been able to create the argument as to why it's in the national interest of both countries to resolve the differences. So individually, why it makes sense for Turkey, why it makes sense for Greece, and why it makes sense for their future interests in the wider region. And I think this is something we might need to work on, because that positive argument is not there. Everything is focused about, yes, maintaining, as Mustafa said, the relationship where it is, so that there's no explosion coming from right or left that might derail things. Yes, trying to find the right time to move ahead, but we have not necessarily worked on this. Yes, the good feeling between civil societies is good, but it's also very susceptible to whatever political tensions and manipulations. So what is the argument? And I think there's an argument. Otherwise, the two countries would not be talking for so long. Excuse me, would not be talking for so long and raising all these issues and trying simultaneously to go back to trust building. So what is it that makes sense for both Ankara and Athens? Why it makes sense for them to try to resolve these issues, whether it's today or tomorrow? And I think this is something that we have failed. I don't think it's a question of extra regional stakeholders or third parties to do this. It's a question of both the Greek side and the Turkish side at all levels to try to do this.
But do you think that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has moved things more in that direction, or had no impact at all, or it's a small impact?
It has moved things in that direction. It has moved things because also the different positions that the two countries have taken. I mean, on the one hand, on the Greek side, it's very interesting how this government, never mind what, you know, there might be reactions domestically, but more or less there's consensus, has taken a very clear stand as to where Greece belongs. Yes, pre-Trump, but still, I think it's a tenable position. And therefore, and because Greece has always been accused of having a wishy-washy past when it comes to Russian influence, it's taken a very clear position, and this is reflected in the fact how relations with Russia have soured, not only just since the Russian invasion, even before that, even with a series of the previous government. For the first time, we had the Russian diplomats expelled, which is very interesting in that sense. But it's also helped that along because from Greece's perspective, from Athens' perspective, one can see that Turkey's wishy-washy position, we are with the West and we are not with the West, we have our own relationship and dynamics with Russia, has not necessarily, I don't know if it's paid off, but it has not necessarily affected adversely in terms of its position, in terms of talking to its allies, whether it's the US or its other allies. And you can see this in the whole discussions going on in terms of European defense right now, and how much Turkish involvement there's going to be, under what terms, and whether one can build a structure within the EU or outside the EU with coalitions of the willing, and there are countries, Western countries, willing to talk to Turkey. So all of that has, from Athens' perspective, gotten Athens' attention, and also, I think, contributes to trying to maintain the climate as it is, while Athens is simultaneously also increasing its deterrence, and while Athens, because of this dialogue, continued dialogue between the two foreign ministers and at other levels as well, I think is considering all of this. And finally, the debate in Athens over the last few months, and as we are moving towards greater discussions towards the future of European defense, we're going to have the German Chancellor take office, so is it tomorrow? We're moving slowly to the NATO summit, is whether this provides a golden opportunity, the two camps. One says you cannot negotiate with the Turks and so on, but is this a Helsinki moment again? Can we use this somehow, because the accession perspective is not there, to maybe try to find a modus vivendi with Turkey and together with our allies that might maybe lead the process along? And can we learn from not closing the issues back in 2003, when there was a real possibility from the exploratory talks to move ahead? And maybe this is an opportunity, and this is where even the Cyprus issue comes in, and where proposals coming out of Cyprus, they might be negated in Ankara, but there seems to be some sort of movement that there might be something in the making that would be in the interest of all, where, of course, as Mustafa said, avoiding the dirty word, compromise, which is, for the Greeks is an anathema, for the Turks is an anathema, and everyone else. But how can you still get around it by compromising without actually saying that you're compromising? So the dynamic, I think, has affected this, just like the other dynamic. Greece's clear position, and it has not necessarily changed, even though its votes in the General Assembly have changed, regarding Israel and Gaza and Hamas. And the fact that even though we know that ultimately there will be some sort of rapprochement, it makes sense between Turkey and Israel, Greece has taken a clear stand in trying also to a rapprochement under today's conditions, where the Greeks and the Israelis and others also have a role to play. And so all of that balancing provides for, these dynamics provide for a roadmap to possible resolution.
Thank you, Dimitrios. Just to the audience, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. We have around 20 minutes still left. But I want to return back to you first, Mustafa, to ask you, is this a Helsinki moment? Could this be a Helsinki moment?
Well, Dimitrios is more optimist of us always, and I don't know whether this is I don't think this is a Helsinki moment yet, but atmospherics are quite important in any relations, and also Greek-Turkish relations. And the wars, both in the north and south of Turkey, have an effect. I think one quite direct effect and one roundabout way. The direct effect was that nobody wanted and wants still a third war that can connect between these two theaters. Because if Turkey is in a war with Greece, or conflict with Greece, open military conflict, that might link the northern war to the southern war, if you can imagine the map. And everybody, I think the message Turkey and Greece got in last few years from every interlocutor, international interlocutor, was that we don't need any more troubles because we already have two difficult wars going on, two different zones. Nobody needs a third one. So that was, I think, a good direct message, and both sides got it from different actors. The roundabout impact is appearing now. As Dimitrios already mentioned, that Turkey took a different road in the war in Ukraine than Greece and Europe, most of the European countries. I would say most, because not all the European EU members agree on the same position. We know some countries who are taking a different road and position. But Turkey, having taken a different road from the European actors, initially had difficult relations with, and several criticism, of course, from many European actors. But while the United States is now, under the Trump administration, is apparently moving away from providing security to Europe and asking Europe to fend off itself, then the position of Turkey's position becomes a differently appreciated position. And also, of course, again, the Trumps and the United States efforts kind of rehabilitating the Russian position in Ukraine is having a push effect for many countries in Europe for a second thought on Turkish positions. Now, leaving aside the Ukraine issue, that new debate about the European future security structure firmly involves Turkey. And I would say that actually it involves more non-EU countries than the EU countries. Right? We have UK, Turkey, Ukraine, as Norway as important non-EU countries. But within the EU, you have, I don't know, maybe Germany, France, Poland, some of the countries at the foremost on this coalition of willing and debate and etc. So in that sense, Turkey started to become part of a European discussion in a way that it was almost never part of it since the kind of suspension, in effect, suspension of the negotiations for full membership. So this time, in a sense, that Turkey is feeling better of itself and its policies. This, I think, creates a kind of a psychological environment in Turkey. Let's not rock the boat as well, right? Okay, if any kind of a new conflict emerges between Greece and Turkey, or if any kind of an old conflict is rehashed and kind of became open again, this will create an environment which is not very conducive for Turkey's participation, full participation in the future European security structure. So in that sense, I think it's having a good effect and impact on Greek-Turkish relations from the Turkish perspective. Whether it's having the same kind of an effect in the Greek perspective, I'm not so sure. Because I watch Greece, of course, from a Turkish perspective and from the Turkish media, which is not always bipartisan and it takes sides. But Greece might be feeling a little bit, Dimitrios could tell us better here, but might be feeling a little bit left out of at least the initial discussions, because the bigger countries with bigger militaries and the capabilities started to moving ahead with discussion, and then kind of smaller countries or the middle powers of the European Union look like they are going to be add-ons. I don't know how this is creating a reaction or a psychological understanding in Greece. That would be also important for the process between Greece and Turkey. In order to have a healthy process, the both sides needs to be feel included in any kind of a debate. Because if you look at the history of Greek-Turkish relations, whenever one side is included into something, or again something that the other is out, that always creates a resentment and imbalance in the relationship, and the relationship goes through a rocky period until a balance is established. So I hope this is not currently, we are not disturbing that balance, because that might have negatively affect the relationship as well.
No, this is a really good pointer that I would ask Dimitrios to respond to, but I want to also get through these questions because we only have 10 minutes. These questions came in a rush at the end. So you can answer that, Dimitrios, but also the question we have here from Alexandra Bogato, who's referring to the recent events, particularly in Syria. What kind of impact could Israel's rapprochement with Greece have on Turkey? And I would ask you both to be quite short now in your answer so that we get to wrap up all these questions.
Yeah, Mustafa said I'm the most optimistic of anyone here, but it's not a question of optimism. I think even from Mustafa's answer, what we get is that both countries feel the need to be involved. Turkey also needs to be involved. Turkey has also been affected by developments. And so the hot coals argument I keep saying impacts everybody. And so the fact that both want some place in this European defense structure that's developing allows potentially for movement on certain things. And I think in that sense is where we are moving. And that's why this might be referred to as something akin to a Helsinki moment. It allows for a framework of cooperation because nobody wants to be left out of this. And so potentially this has to be explored. And as I said, there's a lively debate among analysts in Greece and in the media and so on, different schools of thought, but that school of thought now is being expressed more and more. Let's relook at this together and how we can do this. And I think one of the arguments that's a big selling point in Greece is, do you want, because this is where NATO membership is always so relevant, the fact that both countries joining NATO in February 52 has been influential in reducing tensions and not letting things get out of hand. And so do you want Turkey outside a system that's developing, or do you want it somehow with you? And I think that is a very interesting argument. So, logically people say, no, I want somehow Turkey within the system I'm trying to create in Europe. So we'll see where this goes, but I think there's potential to try to find a modus vivendi. Now, the situation, to go very quickly to the question about the possible rapprochement. Well, I think a possible rapprochement, which is based on necessity and pragmatism on the part of Israel and Turkey when it comes to Syria, and then maybe the two countries even sharing a common border, who knows the way things are going, does not mean necessarily trust. And this is where I think for the Israelis, continuing to build on the relationship that they're building with the Greeks on a variety of fronts, and that relationship is budding, is not going to go away anytime. Or the Israelis building on the relationship with the Greeks and the Cypriots, and also with the Egyptians, and trying to build some other sort of cooperative community on a variety of fronts, whether it's bilateral, trilaterals, quadrilaterals, multilaterals, defense, energy, and other issues that they're working on together. So I think it's two tracks. And I think that in itself is what Greece is banking on, strengthening its relationship simultaneously, trying to improve relations with Turkey, yes, seeing that maybe it makes sense for some sort of rapprochement eventually when it comes to Syria between Israel and Turkey. On the other hand, increasing one's deterrence and also strengthening the Greek position, the alliance, whatever it is, the relationship with the Israelis and other players around the region.
Thank you, Dimitrios. We also have a question here regarding the Black Sea, how you view the EU's role in the Black Sea. It's to both of you. So I don't know if you want to briefly comment on that, and then I'll come to Mustafa.
You want me to comment on this or Mustafa?
If you want to, I mean, they're asking for both of you to comment.
Yeah. I mean, the EU right now has to find a policy, and I think it's fighting the shock of the shock of the US disengaging, and it's trying to come up with a policy. I think it has potentially a role. We cannot deny this. It has a role anyway in the reconstruction of Ukraine in that sense. It has a role and an obligation when it comes to Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova and so on, and their eventual accession, if that might ever happen. It has a role regarding the security, at least, of Bulgaria and Romania. So it has to come up with a new perspective. And this is, but I don't think the EU is prioritizing this right now. But potentially, I see it there. I see that the EU, in some whatever structure might emerge in the future, has a role. And then we have to consider also that post-conflict, let's assume that we get to a phase of a post-Ukraine conflict, we also have to start reconsidering, even if they are contentious, the relations between the EU and Russia and how these affect the security architecture in the region. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I'll ask you to comment on that as well, Mustafa, because I know the EU has been trying to put together a new strategy for the Black Sea. I'm not sure that Turkey was involved in the conversations on that, which is interesting in itself. But the floor is yours.
Yeah, exactly. Turkey was not involved, and I actually talked to one of the persons who was kind of drafting this document, and I asked whether they had consultations with the countries in the Black Sea, not to Turkey only, but the countries in the Black Sea. And I was told that, yeah, once EU adopts its policy, then they will have conversation. So, I mean, this is a way that makes me very skeptical about EU's role in the Black Sea. And it has always been the same problem. Somebody in Brussels sit down and they write something on a paper and they think that this is a policy applicable to different. Black Sea is a wide region. I mean, it's not only Ukraine, obviously, and has several different types of problems, and in some of which EU has a role to play, as Dimitrios already mentioned. But if you are looking into hard security issues, I don't see much of a role to the European Union in the Black Sea region. So, for example, would the European Union involve itself in securing the borders in the Caucasus, for example? If there is a warfare, what the European Union can do or would do, or whether it's really interested in doing anything in that sense. So I'm quite skeptical, and there is no strategy, obviously, apart from the old European Union strategy of the Black Sea synergy. But there is a debate, but currently no announced strategy. So we don't know exactly what the Brussels intentions are. But I can say that there is no consultation with the regional actors, which is a huge weakness, of course.
Yeah, it's not very strategic thinking, but maybe we shouldn't be surprised about that. We just have like a couple of minutes left, so I would like to ask you both the same question. I mean, there's going to be a visit of the Greek Prime Minister soon to Turkey. It's still on the schedule. I think there was some concerns given the internal developments in the country that we didn't talk about. But I'd like to ask each of you, what would you like to see come out of that visit that would progress the agenda a bit further forward?
I'll start. I mean, they have last time when they met the leaders, they asked the foreign ministers of both countries to look into possibilities of solving the hard, real issues, and whether it's possible to take the issues to international court, and etc., etc. So the best outcome in this meeting would be that, okay, the foreign ministers in their talk with each other and friendship and the dinners and etc., they found a way to go forward. Because after all, the relationship is actually moving from meeting to meeting, right? The Athens Declaration was quite important to kicking off real negotiations and dialogue. So now, after a year or so, we need to have something new to move ahead. That's what I would expect in the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, well, I don't like to imagine the worst case scenario, but let's have the worst case scenario at least present a joint public position and not fight in front of the press. In the past we have seen this also. So let's avoid this kind of shenanigans and present a kind of a better approach, and to at least empower those who are pro dialogue and continues to dialogue, and discourage those who are naysayers, in no matter what in the relationship on both sides.
Great, thank you, Mustafa. Dimitrios? Well, I mean, I agree with Mustafa. I don't think the meeting is going to happen so that, so that we have a public divergence between the two leaders. It's going to happen because they see that there is a reason for this to happen. And the divergences in the past have happened between foreign ministers, the previous foreign ministers of the two countries, not the current foreign ministers. So it's true that the relationship is based on this. Of course, this high-level political dialogue it was supposed to be held every year, but every time it's been held, it's always been delayed. We should have had so many of these over the years since it started, but we've had a few of them. Obviously, they're going to stress what has actually worked up to now, and it's true in terms of the positive agenda and the economic aspects. There is more and more progress and interest. On the other things, obviously, they will show that there's an intention to move forward, and I think sidelining the hardliners, at least with their messages, is very relevant to keep the dialogue going. But I would hope, because I'm not privy to any information, but I would hope they might come up with some new ideas for joint initiatives. Remember, there's also this old idea, which is in European councils. Some say it's Erdogan's idea, others say it's Charles Michel's idea about a multilateral cooperation in the wider region, dealing with issues of low politics as well as high politics. So maybe they will take the lead. They will take the lead in trying to show certain initiatives. By the way, what we've also had over time is that, we saw what happened with the joint candidacies to the OSCE. So there is an effort and Turkish support for the Greek candidacy to become a non-permanent member of the Security Council. So there is stuff that has been done, which is a novelty if you consider the recent history between the two countries. And I am sure the diplomats are trying to at least move, if we cannot have substantive discussions at this stage, show that there's movement, there's more movement today than there was a year and a half ago with the Athens Declaration, and building and sticking to the Athens Declaration, even though at times we might have different interpretations of whether either side has actually maintained the spirit of the declaration, is the only way forward.
Thank you, and I think that's a great way to end. Thank you both for joining us. We didn't get a chance to talk about Cyprus, but maybe that's a good thing. We need another whole webinar for that. Thanks for sharing your insights. I was actually more positive than I expected it to be, which I think is a good thing. It's great that the dialogue at different levels is ongoing and there's different mechanisms in place. Hopefully we'll see progress in the future along the lines that you have both suggested, but of course the geopolitical situation in the region and beyond is certainly going to continue to impact this relationship along with many other. So thank you both for joining us. I look forward to seeing the audience again at the next edition of our Unpacking Turkish Foreign Policy. It's going to be looking at Turkey's role in European security, which is much talked about these days. Actually, it seems to be top of the agenda. I never heard Turkey mentioned so much when it comes to European security as I have in the last few months. Invitations will be going out shortly. But thanks again, guys, and have a good evening, both of you, in beautiful Athens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.